Welcome to episode 21 of Let's Rage Together, a podcast where two friends talk about the politics of total liberation and related topics.
We annihilated the world before your very ears.
You can't handle the truth.
Hey everyone, welcome to our 21st episode. In this episode, we'll be talking about some bad things and rad things, and then delving into our main topic, which is essentially asking vegans and people in general to stop hijacking crises, and just how it's important that we consider how we all react, think, and talk about things like natural disasters, diseases, and illnesses. But before we get into that, we just want to thank some cool people who became Patreon supporters. So a massive thank you to Summer, Brendan M, Nicola Y, and Sharon U. Also, thanks so much to the people who left some cool reviews on iTunes lately. It really means a lot.
And if you'd like to also support what we do, we would really appreciate it if you gave us a rating and review wherever you listen to the podcast. And you can also share the episodes with anyone who you think might benefit from hearing our angry rants. But you can also support us financially if you're able to and willing to. And you can do that either via a once-off payment on PayPal or a recurring donation on Patreon. And that helps us to keep things going, keep our hosts paid every month, and just make it a little bit easier for us to run things. And the details for all of that are on our website, letsragetogether.co.za. And as always, you can reach us at mail@letsragetogether.co.za with any comments or questions or episode suggestions or anything like that. And find us on social media with the handle @letsragetogetherpodcast.
Cool, so should we start with the bad and rad?
We should indeed.
It's time for the bad and the rad.
So what are your bads and rads today, T?
So I think a joint rad for us is that we've previously briefly mentioned that Pete and I are in a band together.
Oh, shameless self-promotion.
I don't even care. We have our first show coming up. So excited.
Yeah.
And nervous.
Nauseous and anxious.
Vomiting as we speak. But our first show is on the 28th of February, so that should be just after this episode comes out. So if you're in Johannesburg, please come check it out. We'd really appreciate it. Obviously, if you're into hardcore and punk music, because if you're not, you'll hate it. But we're playing with the Dumpies from the US. They're touring here. Thanks to We Did This Records for organizing it. And we're playing with Goat Throne, Sex Tape, and Caution Boy. And we're going to be playing at the Bowls Club in
The Zoo Lake Bowls Club.
Zoo Lake Bowls Club. So come check it out if you're in the area.
Cool. Good one. Just a bit of shameless self-promotion there for our other projects.
It's also an angry project. So if you like the angry vibe.
Yeah. We just do angry shit all the time. Eh?
Not always.
Angry podcast, angry band.
Those are literally the only two angry things we do.
Angry lives.
Well, come check it out anyway. How about you, Pete?
So I have a combined bad rad because I'm not really sure how I feel. You'll hear. So Chuck Sims Africa from the Move 9 was recently freed. Yay.
Woohoo.
So if you don't know who Move is, they are a black liberation group with many other radical political positions and opinions that formed in Philadelphia in 1972. There were 9 people incarcerated. Unfortunately, 2 of them died while incarcerated. But the final member of the Move 9, Chuck Sims Africa, was freed very recently. He was 18 when he was incarcerated and now was released when he was 59.
Wow.
So, 41 years in prison. So that's the bad part of the rad.
And prisons in general can just die.
Yes. Check out Angela Davis. It's really worth looking into the history of Move if you don't know about who they are. It's actually not an acronym, but you can find that out when you read more. We'll post a link to their website, which is onamove.com, and to an article on The Guardian about Chuck Sims Africa's release.
Yeah, so really rad that he's out, but not so rad that it's only now.
Well, I'm just imagining how shitty it must be to be incarcerated at 18 and have basically it is by far the majority of his life stolen, which he can't get back. So yes, it's really cool that he's been released, but is it really justice when he's had so much time stolen? And how can you really heal that? Do you know what I mean?
I don't think you can.
yeah, so rad bad.
A bad rad.
Do you have any others?
A very small but funny rad. Anonymous for the Voiceless has finally blocked not only Letter H Together on Instagram, but also myself and Pete personally, and all of the
Yeah.
accounts that we are affiliated with, or at least that they know we're affiliated with by our bio description. So I thought that was quite cute that like they actually went to our personal profiles and even went as far as blocking our band page.
As if we need to visit their profile.
Yeah,
But
especially from our band. Like,
yeah, what the fuck?
yeah, so that was cute. Thanks, Avi.
Yeah, I mean, I
Kisses.
don't know what they think we're gonna do. Their account's public anyway. Like, okay, seriously, well done. Just
Yeah.
keep posting that problematic shit people call you out for.
Yeah, but I think they're on a little bit of a blocking rampage. Like everyone who has any kind of like collective liberation politics, they've just been blocking for being called out. So creating a nice little echo chamber for themselves, I guess.
It's so frustrating. Just acknowledge and apologize, and things can be fine. But just keep being shit if you want to keep sinking. Honestly.
But they are the knowers of all things vegan.
Oh,
Pete.
sorry, I forgot they invented street outreach and veganism.
And George is the living ghost of Donald Watson and speaks on behalf of him. Literally.
Okay, yeah.
He has said that. He said he feels fine to speak on behalf of him. So
Yeah.
also kind of rad that they sinking themselves because a lot of chapters are leaving, and they even reshared their video that we kind of picked apart in episode 11 and 17 where they talk about their idea of so-called inclusivity.
Ah, George's misogynist nonsense, honestly.
Yeah.
Well, you know, we all know that centrist consumerist veganism is going to achieve animal liberation, so maybe we should move on to the main topic.
Just as a side note, if anyone's not familiar with our way of being, that was sarcasm from Pete. But yeah, let's move on to the main topic. Today we're basically just chatting about how people, and in particular often vegans, seem to react in pretty insensitive and nonsensical ways a lot of the time when there are crises like natural disasters or illness outbreaks. So we just want to use a couple of examples to unpack the ways that we think people react that are probably pretty harmful. What we want to get at really is how not every crisis or everything that happens in the world is an opportunity for vegans to be like, oh, see, I told you so. You should have been vegan.
Yeah.
And then this would be fine.
Not every person who has a disease got it from eating meat.
Yeah, exactly. And that seems to be such a widespread trend lately and in general with vegans. Like anything that happens, people are like, yeah, you see, you're not vegan. So
any bad thing that happens is blamed on the lack of veganism there. And any good thing that happens, or well, not anything good thing that happens, but it's like this overpromise of all the good things will happen if everybody just goes vegan.
yeah.
You know,
And I mean,
suddenly the wealthy will just distribute food. Like it's just no natural disasters will happen. People will stop mining.
and suddenly like the rich 1% will just be like altruistic
share.
and kind.
Yeah, there will be no more Nazis. Misogyny and sexism won't be around, you know. Come on.
To be fair, there is something to be said sometimes for like, you know, if people just understood speciesism, a lot of problems would, to a certain extent, be solved. Like, not solved, but we can't deny the contribution of animal agriculture to things like climate change and
of course,
disease prevalence and stuff like that. But it's like you say, it's the overpromise and the whole like gotcha, basically.
Yes, exactly. And the whataboutism shit all the time.
Yeah. Which works both ways because a lot of non-vegans
Yes,
use a lot of whataboutisms to avoid like addressing speciesism, but vegans do it as well more than they realize.
Exactly. What you brought up about speciesism is where I have my own theory that even understanding speciesism won't get rid of the other bad isms. Because I feel like, say for some of the recent people who we've had issues with, who are like right-wing, like straight white males who fit into this like box of extreme privilege, who are vegan, even I think they can understand speciesism and see, okay, it's wrong to discriminate based on species membership, because my theory is that non-human animals don't threaten their place in human society. And so I actually think that it's easier for people like that to be compassionate towards non-human animals than towards other people.
Sure. And it's also like a way of virtue signaling to be like, oh, I'm such a good person. And then it detracts away from the other shittiness.
Yeah. So I just wanted to share that idea.
I agree, but I also disagree to an extent, because I think that I agree with your overall sentiment there. But I think that in those cases, there's an understanding of veganism in terms of the very basic definition of speciesism as discrimination based on species membership. But I think we've mentioned it briefly in previous episodes. I'm not sure which ones, but I think a proper and nuanced understanding of speciesism is not just about the species barrier. It's about the modes of oppression and domination that allow speciesism to occur and other forms of discrimination as well. And I think speciesism is very much, not so much an overarching, but a kind of all-encompassing system of oppression and domination that feeds into all the others. So I think if you really understand speciesism, you understand it in a collective liberation sense. So I agree with you, but I think proper understanding of speciesism is a proper understanding of oppression.
Yeah, I agree with what you're getting at, that it can't exist alone. Your anti-speciesism and your veganism has to exist as part of an expansion of total liberation and anti-oppression politics. So alone, it actually doesn't really make sense, and it would actually be kind of single issue, which doesn't really work with it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think what you're referring to, like, people would say they're anti-speciesist, but they actually just vegan.
Yes.
But without a real political understanding of veganism. And I think a true understanding of speciesism brings in things like, we've spoken about Afan Silko's aphorism, and the ideas in there where you link speciesism to animalization of other human bodies that are different from yourself.
Yes.
And you can't separate those. So I think if you really understand speciesism, you have to understand those things. So I would say to the people who oppress other humans and call themselves anti-speciesist, they're not anti-speciesist. They might be like vegan in terms of the basic definition, but they're not anti-speciesist.
Yeah, okay.
But I think we generally agree.
Yeah, I think so. So the really big thing that people have been talking about lately when it comes to this is the fires in Australia, which were obviously really devastating. And we were watching it, obviously, like everyone else in the world. And our thoughts go out to all of the animals, human and non-human, who died and suffered because of it.
And were displaced,
and were displaced. So apparently it's over 1 billion animals that died, non-human animals, and 33 humans. Vegans far and wide jumped on it and were like, this wouldn't have happened if everyone was vegan. Or, okay, cool, the fires are happening now. Why do you care about koala bears burning in trees? When you eat cows, you should be vegan. And that, I think, is such a problematic perspective. Okay, so firstly, I get bummed about it because it's just focusing on veganism, okay? If we can kind of unpack this and you can bear with me. Just focusing on veganism and animal farming and animal agriculture ignores all the other factors responsible for the Australia fires. And I don't know all of the factors. I'm not like some climate scientist or something, but I know that things like coal mining and overconsumption and consumerism, the Australian government cutting budgets, ignoring indigenous knowledge, such as their methods of backburning that they've been doing for ages. There's a range of things that contributed to the fires besides just animal agriculture. Like a range of things contributes to global warming besides just animal agriculture, even if it is the biggest contributor towards global warming and climate change. It is not the only thing. So firstly, it was that. Then, well, actually, that wasn't the first thing. It was one of the things. The first thing was just like, hey, the fires are happening right now. So that was what was getting to me. You know what I mean? It's not the right time when Australia is burning to tell Australia to go vegan. First, let's help. Then let's talk about veganism. Do you know what I mean? Like, you had some good analogies.
Yeah, so the kind of analogies that came to mind when I was hearing all these vegans jumping to like, oh, you care about koala bears, but you don't care about the billions of animals that are killed each year to be eaten or whatever. It's like, it's such tactless, bad timing, horrible strategy to use. But I think of it as kind of like if your house is on fire because you haven't had your electrical certificates checked or whatever, and your wiring is bad, and then your house goes up in flames and your neighbor comes to help and says, yeah, you should have like had an electrician come out and checked your wiring, and
And you give them
that's
like
not gonna help.
pamphlets on how to.
Yeah, let me give you my electrician's number. Like, that's not going to
Yeah.
help. If your house is on fire, you're going to put out the fire first and then look at what caused it and how you prevent it in future. If Australia is burning, you help. You put the fires out. You help
Yeah.
the animals and humans and non-human animals that are in need. And then afterwards, talk about what caused this. How can we be better? Including a conversation about veganism.
Yeah.
You can also think of it as like, if you're visiting someone and their child falls into the swimming pool, you're not going to first ask them, have you thought about sending your child for swimming lessons? Have you thought about buying a pool cover? No, you're going to jump in the pool and save the child and then be like, listen, maybe you should get a pool cover.
Yes. Take your child for swimming lessons. Exactly. So those are great analogies. And it doesn't help people who aren't vegans' impression of veganism to basically just like shame people and not help, to be like this passive critical voice.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like when there's vets and people going out into the fields and helping with the fires, and it seems to the world like the vegans are just sitting there judging. Like, what is that doing for veganism and the animal rights movement as a whole? Like, such a bad look, to be honest.
Yeah, and I think there were probably so many people helping like hands-on with resources and going to actually physically get animals out of dangerous situations, helping with rehabilitation, all of that. I guarantee a lot of those people aren't vegan. Just like, as much as I am really opposed to welfarist arguments for helping animals, I know a lot of people who are involved in welfare that do a shitload for animals. Yeah, they might be inconsistent, and yeah, it might be frustrating that they're not making the connection to veganism, but they're doing a hell of a lot more than a lot of vegans I know.
Yeah, or like indigenous people who put their lives on the line and get assassinated protecting the environment. You know?
Exactly.
Maybe they aren't vegan, but they do a heck of a lot more than you do.
Yeah, exactly.
Also, what I think is not a good strategy is to basically like reward people's compassion with shame. So when people say, oh, I care about koala bears and kangaroos, I don't want them to burn, instead of saying, shut up, hypocrite, like you aren't vegan, so just why are you even saying that?
Yeah, if you're eating a burger, we don't care about your views. Yeah.
Why don't we rather reward the compassion and build from that? I think that's going to be a much more effective tactic to say like, oh, that's super cool, you care about them. Then next step, like, what can we do to help? Then maybe from there you can kind of get to a place where you can say, yeah, but what would be the difference if it was like dogs burning or pigs burning or
cows,
whatever.
which a lot of them were.
Yeah, actually a lot of them were farm animals.
Yeah.
So I think like, while I understand where people are coming from, it is frustrating, the cognitive dissonance that people can have where they can like love some, eat some. Also, it's just I think never going to get people to go vegan out of a place of shame.
Yeah.
And calling them out for being hypocrites, you know?
Especially when they're doing something good. Like if you can imagine your life pre-vegan, if you had gone and volunteered at a dog and cat shelter and someone was like, oh, you're such a hypocrite because you're not vegan and you just care about dogs, you would have been like, okay, whatever, I'm doing something. And it wouldn't have made you more likely to go vegan.
Yeah.
But if they had said, it's really cool what you're doing, can I give you some information on veganism as well? You'd probably be a lot more receptive to that.
We also have friends, you know, involved with projects that are like radical leftist projects that work with communities and stuff like that who are vegan. And they are not like very outspoken about being vegan, but of course, like it stands out because it's not the norm. So it comes up, but like they are first helping how they can in the ways they can. And then when people find out that they are vegan, it's like makes sense, you know what I mean, as an extension of their politics and how they are. Not saying that people shouldn't be outspoken. Of course, like you can be or not be depending on how you want to be. But I think that it really helps to first come from a place of like, how can I help? And well done for being compassionate. Like, let's work together. Hey, have you heard about veganism as a concept? You know what I mean? I don't know. Maybe I'm just rambling.
No, it does make sense. And I think a lot of people who aren't vegan and are helping in a lot of those situations, like people working in welfare, have a lot more knowledge and expertise than you or I have. And they've probably helped a lot more individual non-human animals than we ever have or ever could. And we can learn from them. And if we just shut them down because they're not helping animals in inverted commas, the way we are as vegans, I mean, that's arrogance.
Yeah, and it actually comes down to like an ego thing then. Because it's more like you're offended that they aren't listening to you.
Yeah, but you're not listening to them.
Yes,
yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
So, I mean, like to mention Anonymous for the Voiceless as well, they posted like a post about this where there was it's like this cartoon with like a bunch of animals and then this person sitting on top of it.
A bunch of dead animals, yeah.
Bunch of dead animals and then this person sitting on top of this pile of animals eating a burger.
They jumped right on that, like, why you're not vegan.
Exactly. And on
bandwagon.
top of that, they were fat shaming. Like the image of the person was obviously like very fat shamey, you know. That is like an example of how not to be, I think.
Yeah.
How not to do effective activism.
And they were literally doing that mid when the fires were still going. Like,
yes.
oh, if you care about these animals, you should be vegan, or you're hypocrites, and calling people out. And it was it was in such poor taste.
Zero information about how can you help, where can you donate to, what can we do to assist with the fires. You know what I mean? Sure, plug veganism if you want to, but don't do that. Like like it was on fire. You know what I mean?
And the comparison that was made, and I think we mentioned this in a previous episode when we said we were going to delve a little bit more into this topic. The comparison is valid. The comparison of saying X amount of animals have died. This is how many animals die every single year because of animal agriculture. It's totally valid to bring that to people's attention, but it's how you do it. And like you say, whether you're using shame or not, and whether you are doing it in a situation, in a time frame where there are way more urgent things to deal with right now before having those conversations.
Yes, exactly. Like we said as well, like if the whole of Australia mid fires went vegan, Australia would still be on fire. So it's like you said, you know, let's talk about it after we've put the fires out.
Yeah. And then moving a little bit away sort of from the fires, I just also wanted to mention, aside from thinking about how we deal with these things as vegans or as even as non-vegans, and how we respond to crises in other areas of the world, like if you're not in Australia and this is happening in Australia, you know, how we react with compassion, whether that is through some kind of vegan focus or not. We also have to look at things like the same time that those fires were going on, there was also a massive amount of flooding in Indonesia.
Yeah.
And I thought it was quite interesting, although, yes, there were over 1 billion animals harmed in the fires in Australia or killed. There were 33 humans that died from what I found online. But in Indonesia, 66 people died from the floods. And yet I saw very little. I did see some vegans sharing about the floods in Indonesia, but not even remotely.
But those are more generally collective liberation, like social justice minded vegans.
Yes, exactly. But the general mainstream vegan movement didn't say anything about Indonesia at all. So aside from how vegans co-opted what was happening in Australia and kind of jumped on that as an opportunity to push veganism in a very aggressive way, they also completely ignored what was happening in Indonesia, which is also largely to do with climate change. So arguably just as much linked to animal agriculture as the fires, but yet there was no compassion, there was no information about how to help. And I just think that it's important to realize, and also realize that there were thousands of people displaced in Indonesia by the floods as well. And I have no idea how many animals were displaced or killed. There was footage of a lot of like companion animals left behind when people had to flee their homes. And who knows if there were, farmed animals or anything like that affected as well. I'm sure there was a lot of wildlife as well. And there's just silence on that. And it's largely because Indonesia is a developing country.
Yeah. And Australia is a first world country.
I think that speaks volumes, because we see it time and time again with all kinds of like disasters, or when there's horrible things happening in developing areas, there's largely silence on it. But let something happen in Australia or France or the UK and the whole world is up in arms. And I think as vegans, or as anyone who cares about any kind of social justice, we have to be mindful of that as well. Like, where's our compassion going? It's not limited. We can give compassion to a number of different causes in a number of different areas, but I think it's very selective sometimes and very privileged.
Yeah, it's actually without playing Crisis Olympics,
Yeah.
So
I don't want to say
it's not a like whataboutism thing.
Yeah.
It's just saying like, be aware of it, you know. I mean, same as how people constantly hate on China and Asia. When bad shit is happening in the UK, in Australia, in the US, like...
Yeah. When I said like 66 people died in Indonesia versus 33 in Australia, obviously I'm not trying to compare the tragedies because they are very different events and obviously both are absolutely horrific, but it's just interesting to me that literally double the amount of humans died, but they received probably like 10%, if that, of the media exposure and outpouring of like resources and assistance. I mean, Australia is also a really wealthy country, so they have a lot of resources, a lot of funds. Not to say that you shouldn't be donating or helping in those situations, but Indonesia is a whole different story, and they could probably use a lot of those donations much more.
Yeah. But I mean, it's the same thing. Like, bad shit happens all over Africa too. Like, if you look it up, I mean, there's stories coming all the time out of South Sudan and Uganda and stuff that you never hear anything about.
Yeah.
Just doesn't fit the convenient narrative, I guess.
Yeah.
Talking about hating Asia and China, I mean, the coronavirus has been a big topic as well.
Yeah, and this is another one that a lot of vegans have jumped on and said, you see, if you eat meat, this is what happens. We get these like viruses that we can't control. So firstly, just to put into perspective, I thought we could just kind of have an overview of what the coronavirus actually is, because people seem to react like it was this huge epidemic that was going to wipe out the entire planet in 2 days.
Or they treat it like it's like a common cold.
Who treated it like,
you know, like with the advice of just take some vitamin C and lubricate your throat, and you won't get the virus.
Yeah, well, that kind of feeds into like the misinformation that was shared. We literally saw people saying, make sure you keep your throat moist and don't have spicy foods.
Yeah, so
and have vitamin C.
On the one hand, it's like, oh my God, this virus is going to wipe out humanity. But just like make sure you're eating enough oranges.
Yeah, have an orange and don't have curry and you'll be fine. Yeah, so misinformation is a huge issue. But on the topic of misinformation, you know, people panic rightfully because there's no vaccine for coronavirus, but it is actually very much like flu in that it is an airborne virus. So it's actually a group of zoonotic viruses which are transmitted basically from non-humans to humans. And there are actually a number of different kinds that haven't been found in humans yet, but are probably in a lot of different animal species. So yeah, it's not one virus, it's a group of viruses, and this is just one strain. And
I didn't know that. I thought it was one thing.
Well, it is one of many coronaviruses.
Okay.
Basically. So I think the vegans are hopping on to like the World Health Organization's advice to say don't have raw or undercooked animal products. So people obviously latch onto that and say, yeah, you see, it's animal products, which fine, that's valid. But I think we then forget that like if you're eating animal products, you're eating rotting flesh. Chances of getting sick are pretty high if you don't cook those things properly.
Yeah.
Like you can get tapeworm. I just find it weird that people latch onto that, but the likelihood of getting disease from uncooked animal flesh is pretty likely because it's literally rotting flesh.
Yeah.
You know, there can be all sorts of things in there, including parasites, which obviously cooking helps get rid of that stuff. It's just basic logic. But it's not really like a vegan win point to make. It's not like, exactly. Got you. It's in meat. So obviously meat is the problem.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know.
But we've always known that stuff from like E. coli poisoning from eating chicken or diseases you can get from eating pig flesh.
Yeah, exactly. Like I say, from parasites, viruses, whatever. Anyway, so one thing that has been kind of accurate in a lot of information that's being shared is that there's no vaccine, but it's pretty much standard recommendations to avoid the virus. If you wash your hands and you don't cough on people or allow people to cough on you or sneeze on you or whatever, chances are you're not going to get it. Just like if someone has flu, generally don't be around when they're coughing and don't touch stuff that they've coughed all over. So there is from what I remember reading, there's a higher mortality rate than flu. So you're more likely to die from it than, for example, flu. But what people kind of ignore is that there are a lot more people dying every year from flu.
Yeah, but I think what's scary is the unknown. You know what I mean? Like you said, there's no vaccine in it. Beijing in China, I heard on the news 2 days ago, have quarantined people for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And that's one of the scary things about it, is that the symptoms don't show for 2 weeks. So that's why it's hard to like screen people like they did with Ebola at airports and stuff, because you can't exactly keep someone in an airport for 2 weeks to see if they have it.
Yeah, sure. But what I'm saying is basically like, yes, the unknown is obviously makes it more high risk. And, it is kind of a stronger virus, if you can call it that, than like a normal flu virus. But the fact of the matter is it's a virus. If you haven't had the flu vaccine and you get flu and you don't treat your symptoms in time, you can die. It's not a bacterial infection that you can take antibiotics and kill. Like, your immune system has to fight it. So like, on that note, when vegans are saying, yeah, if you're vegan, this wouldn't happen, that's also ridiculous, because the people who are more susceptible to any kind of virus are those who are in some way like immunocompromised. So people who are already sick, or the elderly. So people who are generally more at risk of getting things like colds and flu are more at risk to getting coronavirus. It's got nothing to do with whether or not you're vegan.
Yeah.
So I just find that that's a bit of a ridiculous point.
Yeah, exactly. It is a ridiculous point.
You can't blame people for eating meat. The spread of it has nothing to do with veganism.
But I have a suspicion that it's actually less about eating meat and more about the fact that it's in China.
Yeah. So that's the next kind of point. So aside from the misinformation that's being spread, it's basically racism a lot of the time.
Fear disguised racism.
Yeah.
Basically.
And people saying, oh, it's China's fault. It's Chinese people this, Chinese people that, Asian people this, Asian people that.
Yeah.
And it's actually just racism. Because also the kind of ridiculous points that I find some vegans making is, on the one hand, they're saying, yeah, you see, if you eat meat, it's your own fault. But then the start of the coronavirus has been linked mostly to, well, it's not confirmed, but to a market which was trading in mostly illegal wildlife. So that wildlife trade is not the same as your usual animal agriculture. So on the one hand, people are saying their whole racist rhetoric of like Chinese people and their eating habits are to blame because they're eating these weird, exotic, wild animal species. And then at the same time, just blanket statement, oh, it's your fault if you eat meat. So on the one hand, they're being outright racist and saying it's Chinese eating habits. And on the other hand, they're saying, oh, it's just eating meat in general. So basically what vegans in this situation are doing is like a double whammy, racism and like just trying to shame non-vegans when it's not even related.
Yeah. But they eat dogs. I'm being sarcastic here as well, but some people in China eat dogs and they have that dog meat festival, and that for some reason is much more unacceptable than every other animal trade, any other animal industry.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I feel like it's always been popular and kind of societally accepted to hate on China and be racist towards Asian people in general.
Exactly.
Which is really shit. And
also just to show how ridiculous it is when people are talking about, oh, it's the fault of the types of flesh that people in Asia eat. There was a video that went around showing people so-called in Wuhan eating bat soup or something like that, and then the virus being linked to the consumption of bat flesh. And it turned out that the video that was going around was not even in Wuhan and was from 2016. So it had literally nothing to do with coronavirus, but it was spread as if it did, which again...
Yeah. Oh my God, coronavirus, but look, Chinese people eat bats, so it's their fault.
Yeah, and it's just people being uncritical and sharing stuff, assuming that obviously, this is the case because there's underlying racism. And that's that.
I think you just slammed the hammer on the nail of the problem there, of basically most problems. Just people being uncritical.
Yes.
Honestly.
Uncritical and shitty.
Yeah.
And racist.
Yeah.
But on the kind of upside, and if you don't follow the roar in you, Shana did a World Pangolin Day video, and she summed up quite a lot about the pangolin trade.
That was super good. It was actually pretty funny as well.
Yeah.
Even though it's about a serious thing.
Yeah. So you should check that out and check out her YouTube channel. But she also mentioned that there's been a possible link to pangolin flesh with coronavirus, which could be a good thing if it's proved. because it might decrease the consumption of pangolins and the illegal trade because they're very critically endangered.
Yeah.
So check out that video, and yeah, just as a side note.
Yeah.
That could be a win. Sort of.
Maybe, yeah.
In an indirect, weird way.
Christopher Sebastian wrote a really good post, which I'm not going to read, but we'll post a link to that in the show notes. And it's titled, "The Coronavirus is Not Cosmic Punishment for Eating Meat and Other Tales of Ableism."
Yeah.
It's very short, but very good. And
As
I think
always.
it ties into what we're saying. This idea of like retribution for cruelty really is actually racist and xenophobic. I mean, you see the same thing, like I saw from a bunch of people, saying like, oh, Japan deserved the tsunami that happened because they do dolphin culling in Taiji.
So ridiculous.
That's like absolute racism. Like the majority of the country are even against the dolphin cull.
And also just really, really, really poor logic.
Yeah, it's terrible.
Like, do you even science?
And really, I think like a good point that he makes, and that we've spoken about before we recorded as well, is how hypocritical it is for people who come from countries with problematic histories to blame whole nations for issues. Do you know what I mean? If you're from the US, if you're from the UK, how many countries did the UK crush and colonize throughout its history? Like, come on, how hypocritical is it to judge China or Japan when your own nation is like a pile of shit?
Yeah. And that's not to say don't criticize the act or like
fight for it. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
go to Taiji, and I mean, Sea Shepherd has done great work there. Like, of course, like people fight the dog meat trade, of course. Like, it's not saying ignore the issues at all.
But don't make sweeping statements like, oh, an entire nation is to blame.
Yeah. Oh, look, they're killing dolphins in Taiji. Fuck Japanese people. Like, why would you say that?
If you were to say like,
Well-
oh, South Africans are a pile of shits because they all want to
Yeah.
have a bra every Sunday,
Yeah.
you'd be lumping us into that, and we're vegan.
Yeah.
So
And
it's the same kind of like overgeneralization that's
Yeah,
just
yeah.
pointless.
really, I hear a lot of anti-China sentiment from a lot of vegans, and it's actually like super problematic.
Yeah. Always found it weird how many vegans actually go over when the Yulin Dog Meat Festival is on to like protest that. And I'm like, you're from South Africa. There's so much shit to protest
Yeah.
here. There's so much shit. So many people who need help. So many organizations that are struggling. So many socioeconomic and social justice issues going on. And you're like, wait, priority?
Dogs.
Fly overseas and protest Yulin. And
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, yeah, let's ignore the racism and poverty and speciesism and everything in South Africa and go,
Well, I mean, you could even concentrate on dogs here because of
yeah,
breeding and puppy mills and
Dog
dog fighting.
fighting.
And so, I mean, I don't know. But I do understand, maybe this is a little side tangent, sorry. It is kind of understandable to me to understand and reject speciesism while still having some internalized speciesism. And I'll acknowledge that. So, for example, myself, having 2 rabbit companions, I am like very inclined towards rabbits. Do you know what I mean? Like I have a compassion for all animals, but like a hyper compassion for rabbits, which you could argue is speciesist.
it is very speciesist.
But I
That's
also
understandable.
acknowledge and reject speciesism in general. Do you know what I mean? So I do get how people can be like, well, I really care about the oceans, so I'm going to go on Sea Shepherd. And I don't know if we should be saying like, yeah, but what about ism stuff? You know what I mean? What about stuff in your country? Like, what about cows? Why do you want to go help whales when you can help cows? Or
Sure.
you know what I mean? So I understand that as well. Like maybe people have that idea when they want to go to Japan for the dog meat thing. I mean, I think in general it is a racist thing that comes out of this like shock of this like, oh, this different culture is doing this bad thing.
But like you said, I mean, I
I
get
don't
that.
know.
I get what you're saying, and I agree. And I would never, like I said, it's not to say don't protest the actual event or the actual thing that's happening. Yeah, go do activism, go do all that stuff. That's great. But even if you are like species biased,
That's a good word for it, actually. Species bias.
it is just speciesism, but we'll call it species bias.
But all of us have it, right? A little bit.
Yeah, sure. I mean, if you have more, but But it's kind of like an in-group, out-group thing. Like you're more inclined to care more about your family and friends because you know them. Like
Yeah, I
if there's
guess
a
so.
stranger and your best friend on a train track, you're going to help your best friend first, and that's human nature, and that's fine.
Yeah.
It's kind of an in-group, out-group thing. Just like if you've been around bunnies a lot, you're going to understand them more, and they're going to be more part of your in-group that you have more compassion
yeah,
to.
exactly.
So it is basically a species bias, just like a friend-family bias you would have. And I think that's human nature, and we can't escape that. But that said, yeah, even if you have a species bias, like we said, I can understand wanting to go over to protest Yulin, but there's also dogfighting rings
Yes,
right here,
Yeah.
which, I mean, yeah, maybe we're just being pedantic. Go fight for whatever you want to go fight for.
Yeah. I mean,
Just make sure you're not doing it because you're being racist.
Yes,
Do it because you
exactly.
actually really care about that thing.
Yes.
And I have no doubt that the people who do go and protest that really do care. I'm not denying that at all. I just think, maybe there's a little bit of an underlying racism that needs to be addressed. If you can go there wholeheartedly saying that that's not the case and you just want to help, and you come back and you also fight the dog fighting rings or do whatever, then cool.
Yeah. I mean, I just was thinking of it in terms of, say, like human rights issues. So, for example, there were a lot of anarchists from the UK, like Ireland, Australia, US, who went over to Rojava to fight ISIS. And I'm sure there were people who were like, okay, cool, but what about the causes here, But they, for some reason, felt this strong calling to this stateless people literally fighting a form of fascism that could affect everyone in the world.
Yeah.
And I, 100% support those people.
Yeah, totally.
But you're right. We just need to be self-reflective about, what is the reason you are going,
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing wrong with being drawn to a specific cause or a specific action. Not at all.
Yeah.
And also it comes down to probably opportunity. And some people have the opportunity to do kinds of activism that others might not be able to. And maybe you're also drawn to that for whatever reason. And that's totally fine. And I would never say don't do a certain kind of activism if there's something to be done elsewhere. Because that is just like a whataboutism. I just think, yeah, like you say, be self-reflective and, yeah, just be honest about your motives, I guess.
And in addition to this kind of crisis hijacking with some agenda that you want to push, it also is pretty bad, not just in terms of crises, but when you get closer to home and you talk about people's issues with fat shaming and obesity and even diseases. Essentially, a lot of vegans do the same thing as they're doing with China and Japan and Asia and Australia fires and everything. Because of that overpromise of veganism healing everything and fixing everything, there is this idea that there's no such thing as a fat vegan, and that fat people are bad, and veganism can cure obesity, and you won't get sick if you're vegan, and to me that it's a similar logic. It comes from the same place of thinking of veganism as this healing cure for humanity.
Yeah, and I think it boils down to shame again. But it also, the logical inconsistencies show when people are like AV defended, you saw the post, I didn't see it, but they defended an overtly fat shaming post saying, well, if you eat meat, you're going to be overweight. And that's actually bullshit because there are a lot of overweight vegans. And it just shows how logically inconsistent it is.
And there are a lot of people who eat meat who are exceptionally fit and healthy people.
Yeah, exactly. Weight is not an indicator of health. I mean, it can be a factor for sure, but it's not, you can't tell someone's health by looking at their body shape. I mean, come on.
Yeah. And with diseases, or say the virus, for example, like you mentioned, a vegan could have if it came from that market, a vegan could have been walking past and contracted the virus and spread it, been the second carrier or something.
Yeah. So I think for me, in conclusion, yes, sure, talk about veganism, talk about social justice, but really timing and tact is really important. And also something that I think is often overlooked is that not everything, and actually hardly anything, is as simple as if everyone was vegan, this wouldn't happen or this wouldn't be an issue. And I think we have to look at the systems that are in place that actually stop people from being vegan in the first place. It's not just as simple as if everyone went vegan. We have to ask, why is everyone not going vegan? why can everyone not go vegan at this stage? Or why is it not a priority for people to go vegan at this stage? And we have to look at the exploitation and commodification of human and non-human persons as a societal norm. And we have to look at how we can dismantle all of those systems and realize that veganism is just one component of that.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I really love the idea of prefigurative politics. Basically, like living out now how you would want to see the world, how you would want it to be. And, you know, to speak about Rojava again, because I brought it up, but they, as part of their politics of democratic municipalism, they include feminism and ecology in their anti-fascist fight, you know? So when people speak about that, you could be like single issue about it and be like, cool, let's first defeat fascism and then we'll deal with the feminist issues. But what they're doing is like, no, why don't we deal with the feminist issues now while we fight fascism, so that patriarchy is dismantled by the time we defeat fascism.
Exactly.
So it's the same thing when it comes to veganism. You're still going to have food deserts. You're still going to have wealthy people exploiting everyone. You're still going to have commodification of labor. You're still going to have commodification of bodies. You're still going to have patriarchy. You're still going to have capitalism. All of that stuff is still going to be there if everybody goes vegan. And all of that stuff is why we can't be single issue about veganism and why we need to tackle all of it from this, you know, the idea of total liberation and collective liberation. Because what is going to happen if we achieve animal liberation? You're still going to have a shitty world to live in.
Exactly. And then it's going to be like, by the time we tackle all of them, the world's going to be over anyway. So it's going to be too late. But also we have to acknowledge the fact that not only does it not make sense to like tick boxes like, cool, animal liberation done. Next, feminism.
Yeah.
Like, let's work on gender equality. Firstly, it's going to take too long and it doesn't make sense because a lot of those other factors are obstacles to animal liberation. If we don't look at feminism and we don't look at racial equality, we can't tackle speciesism as a whole. Yeah, we can make progress, but our progress is going to be stunted if we're not looking at it from a total liberation or collective liberation point of view.
Yeah.
So it's necessary. And if we're going to take the AV approach of like, nothing else matters, we fight for the animals, other people fight for other things, and we'll just be in our little bubble fighting for animal rights, and you can be in your little bubble fighting for everything else, feminism and racial equality and all of that, it doesn't make sense.
The world just does not work like that.
You cannot progress like that because you're going to hit walls. And what is AV going to do when they hit walls and they're like, okay, most people that we are targeting understand the basics of veganism and go vegan. But now we've got a bunch of oppressed groups of people who, some of them live in food deserts and some of them are entrenched in a patriarchal mindset. So they're fine to dominate others because, you know, patriarchy, speciesism, domination, same thing. Yeah. Not same thing, but parallel thing. So they're going to hit all these walls and then what? Then they're going to be like, oh shit, we shouldn't have posted all those anti-intersectional memes.
Thank God we have the capacity to care about more than one thing at one time.
Yeah. Oh, AV.
Not 100% focused on them, but in general, all of us need to be dismantling the stuff in our minds.
Okay, but to be fair, AV is being overtly anti anything other than single issue animal rights.
Yeah, true. But don't you know that straight white males are the most vilified group in the whole animal rights movement, Taryn?
Yeah. Like the little intersectional tower there.
I was joking there, by the way, in case anyone takes me seriously.
Yeah. I mean, AV actually posted a meme of like this little hierarchy, which is so ironic.
It wasn't AV, it was some other shit account.
Yeah, but you know that it's okay.
Yeah.
The same crew.
Yeah. Or should we say ilk?
Them and their ilk made a meme that actually was quite flattering because they put us alongside Christopher Sebastian and Cranky Vegan and the other so-called intersectionals. And at the bottom of their little hierarchy pyramid was all the white men, being crushed by the pyramid of intersectionals.
I don't know why they keep ignoring everyone's points that intersectionalism was coined by Kimberly Crenshaw and it's about like black feminism. They keep still calling us like intersectionals.
Because they don't listen.
Yeah, at all. Just repost like the same old shit.
Animal rights activism, single issue, versus the intersectionals and their ilk.
Just go away. Anyway, maybe we should stop ranting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry about the rant.
Okay, thanks everyone for listening, and until next time,
love and liberation.